All right, we're moving on now. We have another amazing speaker and another person who's actually done this stuff, and he's been doing it for a very long time. I've known him for a long time, and every time I have a conversation with him, we end up talking for hours just about the theory of community, about the power of brand building, how community and marketing integrates. He was the one that pushed and developed the entire Yelp Elite program, which in my mind is one of the clear, most successful and best examples of an ambassador and a community program that I've seen a company really implement. And so he's somebody who's done this for a long time for startups, for big brands. He brings a wealth of experience and some really fascinating ideas, so much so that I wanted to actually have the conversation with him so we can actually dig into this stuff and then open it up to all of you, and we can have a conversation together around what does this really mean to build a brand, to build a community around a brand, and how does that impact your business. So give a nice big welcome to Nish Nadaraja. Which one do you want?
It's fine. Hey, David.
Hey, Nish. How's it going?
Hello, everyone.
All right.
I guess I'm too tall for that. I bumped my head a little bit.
Oh, yeah? Well, you don't have a man bun. If you had a man bun.
Yeah, I got to get one of those.
Yeah, you'll work on it.
Yeah.
It's really hip right now. All right. Well, let's get started by just telling everybody a little bit. I gave them a quick background, but let's tell them a little bit more about your background and what you've worked on so they have that context.
Yeah, absolutely. So I see some familiar faces out there. And so I was at Yelp in the very early days, back in 2004, 2005. There's about 6 of us at the time. We were in an incubator. I think I heard you mention that I was one of the people that helped create the Yelp Elite squad and the whole community program over there. And then I left in 2010. There's about 700 people, so it was a huge change in culture. And since then, I've kind of made a living as like a brand or marketing consultant for some startups and I like to say some start downs. But some of the bigger ones that are out there, like I did some work with like Pinterest, with Eventbrite, Lyft. Then some like big box brands like Levi's, Method, the cleaning products company, Volvo. And that's about it. I'm just hanging out now, so.
Now you're just chilling.
Yeah.
Making some, bringing some restaurants up in San Francisco as well, right?
That's true. I get to, in my spare time, partly from that Yelp blood, kind of invest in a few restaurants in town and some bars as well. So you might see me there. So.
Yeah. Cool. Well, let's dig right into the topic of basically the concept of brand and building a community around a brand and how important it is to have a brand before you start building a community. Yeah. So maybe just give a quick intro of when we talk about brand and community, how do you describe that concept and why is it so important for businesses to understand?
Yeah, so I'll use Yelp since it's probably familiar to a lot of you folks here. So before I worked on the community aspects of Yelp, we sat down and we thought about what the brand of Yelp was. And part of that is an exercise in defining what you're not. So that's a look at the competition that's out there. That landscape was like City Search, the Yellow Pages they got. So we wanted to be something that was irreverent, different, that had a different sort of bite to it. And so we kind of did a lot of like early focus groups to regular people out there about why they would want something like that was user-generated content. So that sort of helped us inform like why Yelp would matter. And it helped with those early users, the beginnings of the community, where it was these folks that were not just reviewing and enjoying meeting each other through the site and in real life, but also felt they were part of a phenomena. And to me, like when I think about a great brand, it's a little bit of a phenomena. And that to me is, when you think about what community means, it's coming together, it's like a fellowship, it's having a common goal. It's, once you have people uniting around something, it becomes a lot easier for them to have dialogues and to, boost each other up and that sort of thing.
So, you spoke about like the brand is largely about what you are not, right? I think we always talk about the brand describing what we are. Yeah. Can you just describe a little bit more what you mean by figuring out what you're not? So
these were more product issues, but in the early days of Yelp, again, this was no smartphones, we were still website only, But people would be writing like crazy amounts of reviews, which was exciting in itself. And then someone would come and they'd be like, Nish, I love Yelp. I've been writing 20, 30, 100 reviews. I'd love to write reviews of my favorite books, and I'd be like, well, there's this little site called Amazon. You can check that out and go there. And so we realized that, understanding what you're about, like having a very, very specific focus was very important. We debated about even like, should people be able to write reviews of like national change, like Starbucks? What would that mean? What would a review even constitute? And how would you reward good behavior, so to speak? Those are all community elements, as you guys all know. And so stuff like voting and compliments, even friends and followers are in essence ways to kind of show that the community is working. So, letting behavior go in certain directions was okay, but you needed to rein it in. Partly that's the community manager job, which we all do. But ultimately, I used to say to like my team, like, if you're doing a really great job getting awesome people writing reviews in your given city or community, I'll fire you because you've done such a good job, right? Because ultimately the community is patrolling itself. They get what good content is or what a good community feels like. And so ultimately, we created the community manager program where it would be the ultimate super user. So it was like a role modeling sort of idea.
So the community manager was a role model for the community members.
Absolutely. I would say even over time, we noticed that some of our best Yelp elite, like the super user people that were part of our Yelp community, became actual paid community managers that we'd hire. So it was a breeding grounds for that, and it became that. We didn't plan it that way.
Right. And so let's talk a little bit more about the specific brand component of that. Mm-hmm. So why did the brand make that possible? Why was that so powerful for getting people to be excited to be part of the Yelp Elite? Like, what was the brand and kind of what was the specific impact that it had on all of this? Why was it so important?
These are things that, I've thought about, like, since leaving Yelp, and sometimes it's just timing. I think we happen to be the right thing at the right time. We did spend a lot of time thinking about how do we make Yelp as a brand feel fun, and that's something people wanted to be part of. And, I use examples, and I did use examples when I was creating the program about like things like, a boring idea like a credit card, but people loved having an Amex card versus like a Visa or MasterCard. So we looked at membership, we looked at emotion around brands like Nike, why people were huge fans around like, say, something which is big for me, like Star Wars, why people would go to like Comic-Con, like Marvel Comics and DC. These are all like these ideas around like strong emotions, and giving people an outlet for it is what we were doing. So the more we could make Yelp feel like something special. It wasn't just about reviewing just businesses in itself, but the people that were the core community really felt a part of what Yelp was. And it was like a magic moment back also in those early days. And so we tried to replicate that through each city we went to. But a lot of it, like when I think about like something like Macworld, it's in essence a large community of evangelists. And most of us don't go to these things and we just use our iPhones or what have you. And that's great, and we're just good customers, right? But these are the real community people, the ones that are going to these conventions. Like something like this, a conference like this is a community, and that becomes like, these are the people you really need to sort of like foster. So we worked really hard at, getting Yelp to mean something. And I got to kind of consult on this for like early days of like Pinterest and a few other things, where we thought about like, what does it mean to be like a pinner? What does it mean to, now I'm getting to look at something with like Lyft around what it means to be a super passenger. Is it even like a community program, or is it more about community as becoming the super evangelist? So a lot of it goes back to the brand, and like, again, is it, Lyft being like, we're just not Uber, or is it something more, right? So.
Yeah, so it's an interesting topic, right? So kind of what you're describing is like a brand can make something feel cool. It can turn it into something that people want to evangelize and want to be a part of. Yeah. So like, but people don't see something as cool until they see other people referring to it as cool. Right. Right? Mm-hmm. And so what comes first? Do you have to build a brand and then the brand is just so powerful that people want to come around it? Or do you have to build a community first, and then that's what makes the brand cool?
It's a tricky question. I mean, it's, egg, chicken sort of thing, right? But it's, for me, I go back, I guess, I get paid to say the brand is more important, but so I have to say the brand first. But I would say, like, you're doing them both at the same time. Ultimately, they're happening in unison. In the early days of a community, the first people that come on board are your brand, right? Community becomes like, who my first 100 people were in San Francisco. That's where we first launched Yelp. And then in New York City was our second community, and it was those 100 people. And those were the people that kind of represented what Yelp was about. And it's, when you think about anything that's people-centric in terms of companies and services, like your Uber ride or your Lyft ride is only as good as that driver, and maybe sometimes the passengers. All the other corporate side kind of falls at the wayside. And so we really, really thought about how do you understand what a Yelper was, like not just Yelp, but being a Yelper, like what does that really stand for?
Yeah, it sounds like you're talking about like kind of that sense of identity.
Yeah,
right? The brand has to have an identity, and then the only way people become members of that community is when they share that sense of identity.
Yeah, there's certain DNA that starts to pop up, and you start to understand like what it takes. Again, I've met a few of you guys over the last night and day, and some of you guys are big companies, and this can apply to everything. I keep going back just to Yelp because it's easy for me to talk about with you. But what we did was we did these exercises called persona exercises, and they were in essence like taking not people we knew, but creating like the idea of like this guy David Spinks is 31 years old, and he does this for a living. He makes this much money. He's married and not married, that thing like that. And we took them through like actual the onboarding, what it meant to like become Yelp Elite, what it meant to get their first compliment, things like that. And we wanted to understand that psychology around it. So we did things that you don't see out there in terms of like the actual like community feel. It's like when you see a movie, there's so much backstory. We did a lot of backstory, and to me, the brand, a lot of that is the backstory. You're not walking into like J. Crew and being like, "Oh my God, look at this great brand," right? But there's a lot of story that's happening that kind of informs the sort of like crazy shirt you're wearing or whatever like that.
There's an emotion and a reputation.
There is.
So what does it look like in practice? So if I'm a community professional or building a company and I want to like build a great brand that's cool, what does that actually look like? Is it like a set of values that we create? Is it a PDF? Like what does it look like in practice in a way that we can actually apply it to our businesses and our communities?
Yeah, so I guess like cool is, I don't know, it's a relative term. I mean, like I've a few years ago, I got to consult on like a community of, in essence, software professionals, which arguably is not necessarily cool, right? But it was still, it was very...
It is here.
Yeah, exactly. But it felt special. And the idea is sort of like a feeling of belonging, right? So you want people to feel part of something. And, community to me is just belonging. And that idea, so cool is, one of these kind of like words, it's like saying like, that's interesting. I don't know if it really holds a lot of weight sometimes, but it is within that group about being part of something. And so partly it's, again, like I go back to sociology, anthropology, psychology. Good thing that I was a liberal arts major, I guess. And, looking at a lot of these ideas and understanding like within that specific like idea or ecosystem, whatever the company I'm looking at, why these people tick, like what makes them compelled to do more. And that's understanding the behaviors that are happening within that community. For us, at Yelp, it was writing reviews, but it was also creating like lists and being on our talk boards. And then, how do you perpetuate that? And in essence, you look at each community separately, but ultimately you want people to kind of get rewarded for doing good behavior.
Right, so I want to dig in a little bit more into that question though. So you do your personas, you do your research. I guess if we're looking at the process of developing a brand, you research, you come up with a concept for what your brand is and what you represent, what you are and what you are not, and then what? Like, how do you actually put this into practice into your community?
Well, it's repetition. There's like the show and tell idea. Like a lot of people say, well, we stand for this, but we made it a big point. My early team there was like showing by example. And I think, again, community managers show by doing the right behaviors, and I think that's, in a way, it was easy for me to create community at Yelp because it was so people-centric. I think it's a bigger challenge when you talk about, being at a company like GE and having to think about community, So I think the challenge is, again, going back to like a unified idea, pushing it out there a lot. We spent a lot of time, we had the luck of the idea of trying to create Yelp as a lifestyle brand because we wanted to feel like, I'm a Yelper, I Yelped something, things like that. So I spent my marketing budget on really interesting swag that felt like exciting and coveted, I guess. And not like, people were like running down the streets to get it, but it was different at that time. Like, people were making extra large Hanes t-shirts, and then when we came along and started doing shirts where you got to tell us your size, and we did stuff like that where it felt like it was something special. And so we were showing how important Yelp was, and the swag kind of helped dictate that this was like a whole new way to kind of go about doing something, and sharing opinions about local places was, in our case, the thing we were doing.
So like a lot of companies and maybe some of the people here are building communities, and like people just like, they're not that excited about it, or it's really hard to bring them together. Maybe the brand just isn't that strong, or it's not that specific. Are they screwed? Like, can the company do anything if they don't already have a very strong brand and a strong image and identity? Is this something that you can just adopt and adapt?
That's tricky. I mean, I've come into those situations. You have a pre-existing sort of world that's out there, and now you're having someone come in. And ultimately, I guess the best advice there is to look for like, it'd be like me having people, laugh at my jokes in the audience or something like that. You're looking for change agents, people that you can go to the community. If you're the new community manager coming in, you're in essence looking for people that are already part of something and saying like, I'm here to help fix this, to get it back on track. So what I've done in the past is I've gone out to the community itself and said like, I'm the lowest person out here. I don't know anything about what's going on here. Tell me what's wrong, and like work with me and help me. I'm like the guy who's going to go back to the company, but tell me how we can make this better. And ultimately, those people become the ones that kind of help move things along. Again, like in the best days, like I was saying, like in the Yelp community days, like ultimately that community manager is leaving and can take the day off because the community runs itself. If you have the right like change agents or people that are kind of already supporting what you're doing out there. I'm not sure if I answered the question, but
yeah, it's a tough one to really think through.
Okay.
But, so for a community professional, is it the community professional's responsibility to create a brand for the community, or is this something that has to be core to your company? And if it's not there, you need to start at the company level, not at the community level. It's
a company first thing. I mean, I think and I'm not sure, with everyone here in the audience, if you work at an early stage startup, like in San Francisco or the Valley out here, you probably have this luck of getting to talk to other engineers or people that are in the communications team, like PR, marketing, or even the founders. And, it has to be a top-down thing. We spent a lot. I was lucky, like I said, I was there in the very early days of Yelp and got to inform decisions around the product, things that seemed like small little details, but to me the details were what make community, like small product features, things like that. And so from a top-down level, like we had the luck of understanding why community was the entire brand. Not everyone has that luck or comes into like larger organizations on a community team. And there I think it's a chance to, spend your first few weeks if you're starting out that job, like getting to dialogue with these different departments and understanding, going through the brand book, which a lot of larger companies have, and, like understanding like why everything from like color choices were made, what names were not chosen for the company. All these things to me help inform like why the brand exists. And again, I don't care if it's like a really sexy sort of brand or if it's more like a B2B idea or whatever. These things they all have a history and origin. And those are really, to me, like sexy parts of why people care about something. And so I think that's where I'd go to if I was stuck in a spot where I didn't get to inform and work with like the team right away.
Right. How many of you feel like you have a clear idea of like what the brand is and all the guidelines for your company? All right, good amount. Do any of you have like a brand guide or a style guide that defines the decisions you make for your community? Okay, about half. Yeah.
So one of the things about this, which is great, I think there's a term that gets used a lot. It's called a living document. Like a brand guide should be looked at. I would say, when I do brand guides for companies, like we purposely look at them almost like once a month, just to kind of keep ourselves in check. It's like, you know, like if you're on a membership site, like, you know, like something like Facebook or Yelp or what have you, or Pinterest, you know, if your community log off a lot, because then you realize how different the feeling is as someone who's coming on there. So to me, like, no normal customer or member of the community gets to look at the brand book, right? But so your job is to kind of make sure that stuff's out there. The community person, in essence, becomes the closest to the customer, and that's like a super powerful and awesome and scary position to be in, but you become like that front force that's out there.
Cool. So we're going to open up for questions in a second. What's the one piece of closing advice that you'd have for a community professional to build a strong brand and a community around that brand?
I would look at positioning. You know, I would say when you're, whatever is out there, why people are doing whatever else they were doing before your brand existed, that's where I'd start. So, you know, with Yelp, we were out there trying not to beat City Search or Zagat, but to get rid of the yellow pages. So for us, it helped us internally understand like what we were trying to replace.
So look at what people are already doing, what they aren't, and where there's an opportunity.
That gets back to the point about like understanding what you're not. You know, like we weren't the yellow pages. We wanted to do something different. Even the name Yelp, which most people don't think about, is like a combination of yellow pages and help. And that's not out there publicly necessarily, but that was an inside joke for us when we were picking the name, that it was like, you know, a little stab to the yellow pages.
And it goes back to what we all discussed earlier, which is like community is about who belongs and who doesn't in many ways, and you have to have that boundary. And there'll be people who don't belong, and that defines a lot of who does belong and who's part of it.
Absolutely.
Cool. We're going to open it up for any questions. Got one right here.
There you go. Thanks. Hi, I'm
Hi.
Casey Schultz. I've actually been a Yelp Elite since like 2009, so
Wow, awesome.
big fan of the program. Now, you were talking about branding and who belongs and who doesn't. When recently, or a couple years ago, the Yelp Elite program was actually written up as creating monsters in the community where people would go and kind of use their status and over vendors' heads and try to get special treatment. So when you're creating these programs with a group of people that you're telling they're special and they do get special treatment, how do you keep your brand intact in the way that they behave and what you know now?
Yeah.
If you were to go back and do anything different, what would it be?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was leaving at the time, so I don't know if I have to answer that too much. But so the question, if everyone else didn't hear it, was what happens when people like get a little overzealous? And you know, when the brand succeeds, when the company is getting to a certain level, there's a sense of, you know, overzealousness. That's a nice way of putting it in some cases. So you know, on one hand, like you have these stories like of the Yelp Elite abuse, and these become just, you know, internally we were like, it's human nature. You're gonna have examples of this, the vocal minority, where like things like this pop up, and luckily Uber has come along to take away a lot of the hate that Yelp has. But you know, but back then it was very much like people were looking for it was like a witch hunt looking for these stories. So we kind of like looked at them not like as patterns, but more like as, you know, small things that were happening. And how could we, you know, if we could find that exact person, the community manager would actually kind of get engaged with them and kind of sort through that, at least internally. PR is a whole other beast to kind of sort through there. But, you know, more, again, you're looking for patterns to see if this is actually happening a lot. So the communication side is a whole different story. And I think generally we were more worried about making sure that it actually wasn't rampant within it. So I don't know if that's really, you know, a full great answer around, you know, dealing with the monster of the Yelp Elite idea. But, you know, for us, we wanted to kind of point out that these were actually great examples. I mean, like, look at everything else that was great about it, like all the positive stuff that was happening. So that was the challenge there. But I mean, again, like my old boss would call that a high-class problem.
Another question here.
Hello. Thank you so much for that.
Here you go. Here's a quick substitute for you.
Thank you.
Saves injury in any.
I'm part of a company that is building, it's an early stage startup, and we're trying to build our identity and our brand. And I'm curious, we have a really strong initial community, and it's really fantastic to engage with them. But as we grow as a brand and grow into our new identity, kind of what we see for a long-term vision, how do we support that early community and knowing that and letting them know they're still recognized and appreciated, but that we are moving forward? And how do we change that community into something that's like what we see as a greater vision if our current community doesn't always fit into that longer term vision?
That's a great question. You know, I would say, you know, we always, you know, took a full frontal approach. You know, I still like to say that Jeremy Stoppelman, like the founder of Yelp, is still, you know, writing reviews. He's accessible that way. And so one example is when we were growing and we started adding, the first time we added advertising, we were super worried about what that would change. Like for the first year and a half almost, we didn't have advertising. So it was like this glorious sort of, you know, early stage, sort of early, you know, paradise sort of thing. And then we were really nervous about that, about how they would react to those ads coming on and what that would mean. And so Jeremy and I actually crafted a letter. I ghost wrote it, he gets the credit, but you know, but we wrote it together with heart around being like, we're gonna have some changes that are gonna happen. We want you guys to be our first guard to understand like what these ads look like. Here are our first 3 advertisers. We're trying to think of, you know, brands that we want to work with that fit into the Yelp demographic and psychographic. Call us out if we're not going to, you know, do that. And I remember Jeremy writing in there, like, we'll never have McDonald's as an advertiser. Now McDonald's is an advertiser. But I mean, but at the time, it seemed really powerful. And I think everyone, you know, that got that email felt very strongly about it, that we get it. This was a change. You know, people were writing into us being like, we thought you guys were going to go out of business. We're glad you have advertising. So I think partly it's just like, you're going to lose some people, and that's part of change, and that's just the way the world works. I think being upfront with people about why things are happening is probably the best strategy there. And so it's, you know, I always get really peeved when I get an email from the CEO or founder and it actually doesn't go to him or her. So we specifically, it was like, you know, Jeremy's email that it came from. And I felt that was like, again, back to that full frontal idea. Again, not every company might have that luxury to be able to do that, but, you know, I felt it was very honest and very authentic. And it, you know, definitely made it a lot more easy to swallow when changes were happening. So I don't know if that answers that.
Cool. Thank you very much, Nish.
Yeah. Good seeing you, sir.